The first time Olivia Grey appeared in Timberline, folks said the wind carried her sorrow across the valley. A young widow at 23, she arrived in the Montana Territory in the summer of 1879 with nothing but a small trunk of belongings and eyes that seemed to have forgotten how to shine. Dust swirled around the stagecoach as it pulled into the small mining town. The driver, a weathered man with skin like tanned leather, helped her down. Olivia's black mourning dress stood stark against the earthy tones of the frontier settlement. She clutched a small leather-bound book to her chest, her wedding band still gleaming on her finger. "Madam, the boarding house is just down the way," the driver said, pointing down the main street. "Mrs. Hawkins runs a decent place." Olivia nodded but didn't speak. She hadn't spoken much since they'd buried Thomas back in Pennsylvania. 4 months of marriage followed by a lifetime of silence. That's what the typhoid had left her with. The townsfolk of Timberline soon learned that the new widow didn't speak not a word to anyone. Mrs. Hawkins, a round woman with a voice that carried across 3 counties, tried her best to draw Olivia out of her shell. "Honey, you can't keep all that grief bottled up inside," she'd say, setting down a plate of food that Olivia would barely touch. "It'll poison you from within." But Olivia remained silent. She found work at the town's small dressmaking shop, her nimble fingers creating beautiful garments while her lips remained sealed. Her silence made folks uncomfortable. They didn't know what to do with a young woman who wouldn't or couldn't speak. The men of Timberline occasionally cast glances her way. A widow as young and beautiful as Olivia Grey shouldn't stay alone forever, they reasoned, but her silence drove them away. Nobody wanted the silent widow. "It ain't natural," said Bill Jenkins at the saloon one evening. "A woman who won't speak her mind, that's against nature itself." The others laughed and agreed, but Yorick Hawkins sat quietly at the end of the bar, nursing his whiskey. Unlike the others, he found something intriguing about the widow's silence. As the town's newest cattle rancher, Yorick was something of an outsider himself. He'd bought the old Peterson place last spring and was slowly building it into something worthwhile. Yorick was 31, tall with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. He'd seen enough of the world to know that silence often hid the deepest stories. The next day, Yorick found himself outside the dressmaker's shop. He needed a new shirt for the upcoming Founders' Day celebration, or at least that's what he told himself. The bell above the door jingled as he entered. Olivia sat by the window, sunlight streaming across her auburn hair as she worked on a delicate piece of embroidery. She glanced up, her green eyes questioning. "I need a new shirt," Yorick said, removing his hat. "Something that won't make me look like I just stepped out of the cattle pen." Olivia nodded and set her work aside. She gestured toward a bolt of fabric, raising an eyebrow in question. "That blue looks fine," Yorick said, studying her face. "I'm Yorick Hawkins. I own the ranch east of town." She nodded again, taking measurements with deft movements that suggested years of practice. Her hands were small but capable, and Yorick noticed a small scar across her right palm. "You do beautiful work," he said as she jotted down his measurements on a scrap of paper. "Mrs. Hawkins was wearing one of your dresses on Sunday, said it made her feel 20 years younger." A ghost of a smile touched Olivia's lips but vanished just as quickly. When Yorick left, he promised to return in a week for his shirt. What he didn't say was that he'd be back sooner than that. True to his unspoken word, Yorick returned to town 3 days later. He sat on the bench outside the dressmaker's shop as Olivia was closing up. She looked startled to see him there. "Evening, Mrs. Grey," he said, standing and removing his hat. "I was wondering if you might allow me to walk you back to the boarding house." Olivia hesitated, then gave a small nod. As they walked down the dusty main street, Yorick kept a respectful distance. "I know you don't speak," he said after a moment. "That's all right by me. I've spent most of my life around cattle, and they're not much for conversation either." The comparison drew another fleeting smile from Olivia. "I reckon there's plenty of folks who talk without saying a thing worth hearing," Yorick continued. and others who say volumes without opening their mouths at all. When they reached the boarding house, Olivia paused at the steps. She looked at Yorick for a long moment, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. She wrote something quickly and handed it to him. "Thank you," it read in elegant script. Yorick smiled. "My pleasure, Mrs. Grey. I'll see you tomorrow." And so began a strange courtship. Every evening, Yorick would wait outside the shop to walk Olivia home. He spoke about his day, about his ranch, about the weather or the town gossip. Olivia would listen, occasionally writing brief notes when she wanted to communicate something specific. The townsfolk noticed, of course. Timberline wasn't big enough for secrets. "What does he see in her?" Martha Collins whispered to Mrs. Hawkins as they watched Yorick and Olivia walk past the general store. "Maybe he appreciates having someone who listens," Mrs. Hawkins replied. "God knows the rest of us can't stop chattering long enough to hear ourselves think." Founder's Day arrived, and Yorick wore his new blue shirt. It fit perfectly, highlighting his broad shoulders and bringing out the blue in his eyes. He found Olivia sitting alone beneath a cottonwood tree, watching the festivities from a distance. "You did a fine job with this shirt," he said, sitting beside her. "I've had 3 compliments already, and I'm not a man who usually gets noticed for his fashion." Olivia smiled and wrote on her notepad, "You look handsome." "High praise from a woman of your talents," Yorick replied with a grin. "Would you care to walk with me?" "There's something I'd like to show you." He led her away from the celebrations to a small hill overlooking the town. The setting sun painted the mountains gold and purple. "I come here to think sometimes," Yorick said quietly. "It reminds me that there's a bigger world out there, but also that this little piece of it is worth protecting." Olivia's eyes reflected the sunset as she looked out over the valley. "Mrs. Grey, Olivia," Yorick said, turning to face her. "I know we haven't known each other long, but I find myself thinking about you all hours of the day. I respect your silence, whatever causes it. I just want you to know that if you ever want to share that burden, I've got strong shoulders." Olivia's eyes filled with tears. She wrote hurriedly, "You deserve someone whole." Yorick read her words and shook his head. "You are whole, Olivia, silent or speaking. You're the most complete person I've met in this territory." She took back the paper and wrote again. "My husband died because of me. I gave him bad water. I knew the stream was contaminated, but I forgot to tell him." Yorick's expression softened as he read. "So that's the weight you've been carrying," Olivia nodded, tears falling freely now. "That's a heavy burden," Yorick said gently. "But it was an accident, Olivia, a tragic mistake, not a sin." She shook her head vehemently and wrote, "I haven't spoken since his funeral. The words won't come." "Then we'll find other ways to talk," Yorick said, taking her hand. "Or we'll sit in silence. Either way, I'd like to court you properly if you'll allow it." Summer turned to autumn, and Yorick's courtship of the silent widow became the talk of Timberline. He brought her wildflowers and books. She knitted him a scarf for the coming winter. They developed their own language of gestures and written notes, communicating in ways that sometimes seemed more intimate than spoken words. One crisp October day, Yorick took Olivia to his ranch. The small house was simple but well built, with a wide porch facing the mountains. "It's not much," he said as he helped her down from his wagon, "but there's good water and better grass. The cattle are fat and happy." Olivia explored the house with interest, running her hands over the wooden furniture Yorick had made himself. In the kitchen, she found sourdough rising in a bowl. "My mother taught me to bake," Yorick explained, looking somewhat embarrassed. "Said no man should depend entirely on others for his bread." Olivia wrote, "A man of many talents. Jack of all trades, master of none," he replied with a laugh. They ate fresh bread with butter and honey on the porch, watching eagles circle above the distant mountains. It was the most peaceful afternoon Olivia had experienced in a long time. As winter settled over the Montana territory, heavy snows isolated the town. Yorick made the difficult ride into Timberline twice a week to see Olivia, sometimes staying overnight at the town's small hotel when the weather threatened. Christmas approached, and the town planned its annual celebration. Mrs. Hawkins found Olivia in her room staring out the window at the falling snow. "Mr. Hawkins is a good man," the older woman said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I've never seen a man so patient or so determined." Olivia nodded, her eyes still on the swirling snow. "He loves you, Mrs. Hawkins continued. "Anyone with eyes can see that. The question is, do you love him back?" Olivia turned, tears in her eyes. She nodded again, more emphatically this time. "Then don't let fear keep you from happiness, child. We all carry regrets. The brave ones learn to carry them while still moving forward." The Christmas celebration filled the town's small church with candlelight and pine boughs. Olivia wore a dress of deep green that she'd made specially for the occasion. Yorick met her at the boarding house, his eyes widening at the sight of her. "You look like spring in the middle of winter," he said softly. After the service, the townspeople gathered in the meeting hall for food and dancing. Yorick led Olivia to a quiet corner. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small package from his pocket. "Merry Christmas, Olivia." She unwrapped it carefully to find a silver locket. Inside was a tiny painting of the view from Yorick's ranch, mountains, meadows, and endless sky. "So you can carry the view with you," he explained. Until you decide if you might want to see it every day." Olivia understood his unspoken question. She took out her notepad and wrote, "Ask me properly." Yorick grinned and dropped to one knee, causing several nearby townspeople to gasp and fall silent. Soon the entire hall was watching. "Olivia Grey," Yorick said, his voice steady despite the audience. "I love your kindness, your strength, and your beautiful spirit. I would be honored if you would become my wife. Will you marry me?" Olivia's hands trembled as she wrote her answer. "Yes." Cheers erupted around them as Yorick rose and pulled Olivia into an embrace. For the first time since they'd met, he kissed her, a gentle press of lips that promised more to come. The wedding was set for early spring. Through the harsh winter months, Olivia stayed in town while Yorick prepared the ranch house. He added a second bedroom, expanded the kitchen, and built a covered walkway to the barn so Olivia wouldn't have to trudge through snow to gather eggs or milk. As the snow began to melt, revealing patches of mud and early wildflowers, Timberline buzzed with wedding preparations. Mrs. Hawkins appointed herself wedding coordinator, directing the creation of decorations and planning the feast. The night before the wedding, a fierce spring storm rolled through the territory. Lightning split the sky and thunder shook the boarding house windows. Olivia sat awake, watching the storm and thinking about the changes tomorrow would bring. Morning dawned clear and fresh, the world washed clean by the night's tempest. As Olivia prepared for her wedding, Mrs. Hawkins helped her with her dress, ivory silk with delicate lace that Olivia had worked on for months. "You're a vision," Mrs. Hawkins said, wiping away a tear. "That man won't know what hit him." The small church was filled to capacity. Everyone in Timberline had turned out to see the silent widow marry the patient rancher. Yorick stood at the altar, looking more nervous than he had facing down a charging bull the previous summer. When Olivia appeared at the church doors, a collective sigh rippled through the congregation. She walked slowly down the aisle, her eyes never leaving Yorick's face. The minister smiled at the couple. "We are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The ceremony proceeded as expected until they reached the vows. The minister looked concerned. "The bride has prepared written vows," he explained to the congregation, "which I will read on her behalf." "No," Yorick said suddenly. "I'll wait." A murmur ran through the church as Yorick turned to face Olivia, taking both her hands in his. "Take your time," he whispered. "I've got nowhere else to be for the rest of my life." Minutes passed. The congregation grew restless, but Yorick remained steady, his eyes locked with Olivia's. Tears slid down her cheeks as she struggled internally. Finally, in a voice rough from disuse but clear enough to reach the back of the church, Olivia spoke her first words in over a year. "Yorick," she said, the name emerging like a prayer. "I love you." Gasps and quiet sobs echoed through the church. Yorick's eyes filled with tears. "I promise," Olivia continued, each word seeming to come easier than the last, "to love you, honor you, and walk beside you all the days of my life." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up could be heard all the way to the next town. The celebration lasted well into the night. Olivia spoke little, each word precious and carefully chosen, but she did speak. To Yorick, to Mrs. Hawkins, to the friends who had supported her through her silence. Later, as Yorick drove his new wife home to the ranch, Olivia leaned against his shoulder. "Thank you for waiting," she said softly. "I would have waited forever," he replied, kissing the top of her head. Spring turned to summer, and Olivia blossomed like the wildflowers that carpeted the meadows around the ranch. Her voice grew stronger, though she remained a woman of few, well-chosen words. The ranch prospered under their joint care. Yorick expanded the herd while Olivia started a vegetable garden and kept chickens. They fell into the rhythm of ranch life, early mornings and long days of work, punctuated by quiet evenings on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains. Olivia continued to sew, making curtains for their home, and occasionally taking commissions from townspeople who made the journey to the ranch. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch swing Yorick had built, Olivia took her husband's hand and placed it on her stomach. "We're going to have a baby," she said, her voice soft but steady. Yorick's face transformed with joy. He gathered Olivia in his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around until she laughed a sound that had become one of his greatest treasures. "A baby," he repeated, setting her down gently. "Our baby." The pregnancy brought challenges. The nearest doctor was in Billings, a full day's ride away. Yorick worried constantly, especially as winter approached again. "Maybe you should stay in town until the baby comes," he suggested one evening. "Mrs. Hawkins would look after you and you'd be closer to help if needed." Olivia shook her head. "My place is here with you. Our child will be born in our home." As her belly grew, Olivia prepared for the baby's arrival. She sewed tiny garments and quilted a blanket decorated with embroidered wildflowers. Yorick built a cradle from pine, carving mountain scenes along its sides. The winter of 1880 was milder than the previous year, for which Yorick gave daily thanks. In February, when the first signs of labor began, he sent a ranch hand racing toward town to fetch Mrs. Hawkins, who had delivered half the babies in the county. The labor was long and difficult. Yorick paced outside the bedroom door, flinching at each of Olivia's cries. Mrs. Hawkins occasionally emerged to fetch hot water or clean linens, her face revealing nothing. "Women have been doing this since Eve," she told Yorick firmly when he asked for the 100th time if Olivia would be all right. "Have faith." After 18 hours, a new cry joined Olivia's, the lusty wail of a healthy baby. Mrs. Hawkins opened the door, her apron stained but her face beaming. "You have a daughter, Mr. Hawkins," she announced. "A beautiful little girl with her mother's eyes and your stubbornness. She took her time coming, but she's perfect." Yorick found Olivia propped against pillows, her face exhausted but radiant, a tiny bundle in her arms. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, hardly daring to breathe. "Meet your daughter," Olivia said, folding back the blanket to reveal a red, wrinkled face with a surprising amount of dark hair. "She's beautiful," Yorick whispered, touching the baby's cheek with one finger. "Just like her mother." "I want to name her Hope," Olivia said, "because that's what you gave me when I had none." "Hope Hawkins," Yorick tested the name. "It's perfect." Mrs. Hawkins stayed for a week, helping Olivia adjust to motherhood and teaching Yorick how to change diapers and swaddle the baby. When she finally returned to town, the new family settled into a different rhythm, one dictated by Hope's needs and schedule. Spring arrived, bringing with it Hope's first smile. By summer, she was sitting up, watching with curious eyes as her father worked with the horses and her mother tended the garden. Autumn saw her first tentative crawls across the cabin floor. One golden October afternoon, exactly 2 years after Yorick had first taken Olivia to see his ranch, They sat on a blanket in the meadow while Hope practiced standing by holding onto her father's fingers. "I never thought I could be this happy again," Olivia said, watching her husband and daughter. "After Thomas died, I thought my life was over." "You were drowning in guilt," Yorick replied. "Sometimes we need someone to throw us a rope and pull us back to shore." "You did more than that," Olivia said. "You sat with me in the water until I remembered how to swim." Hope let go of Yorick's fingers and took one wobbly step before plopping down on her bottom. She looked so surprised that both parents laughed. "She'll be running before we know it," Yorick said, lifting Hope onto his shoulders. "Just like her mama, once she sets her mind to something, there's no stopping her." As they walked back to the house, the setting sun turning everything to gold, Olivia reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the depths of grief and silence to this life filled with love and laughter. That night after Hope was asleep, Olivia found Yorick on the porch looking at the stars. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, settling beside him. Pursuing a woman everyone else avoided, a widow who wouldn't speak, Yorick pulled her close. "Not for a single moment. I knew from the first time I saw you that you were worth waiting for. Some treasures are hidden deep, but that only makes finding them more rewarding." "I'm glad you found me," Olivia whispered against his chest. "I'm glad you spoke my name," he replied, kissing her hair. "And every word since has been a gift." Years passed, and the Hawkins ranch prospered. Hope grew into a strong, confident girl with her mother's auburn hair and her father's storm blue eyes. She was joined by two brothers, Thomas, named for the husband Olivia had lost, and James, named for Yorick's father. Timberline grew as well, transforming from a small mining settlement into a proper town with a school and a small hospital. Olivia occasionally taught sewing classes to the girls at the school, her once silent voice now confident as she explained stitches and patterns. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yorick took Olivia back to the hilltop where he had first declared his intentions. The view had changed, more buildings in town, more fences crossing the valley, but the mountains remained eternal. 10 years, Yorick marveled, his hair now streaked with silver at the temples. "It seems like yesterday and forever at the same time." "The best kind of forever," Olivia replied, leaning into his embrace. From the valley below came the sound of their children's laughter as they played with the ranch dogs under Mrs. Harkin's watchful eye. "Do you remember what you said to me on our wedding day?" Yorick asked. "The very first words you spoke aloud to me," Olivia smiled, the years having softened but not erased the beauty that had first caught his attention. "I said your name, and then I said I loved you." "That's all I ever needed to hear," Yorick said, his voice thick with emotion. "Everything else has been a blessing beyond what I deserved." "We both got more than we deserved," Olivia replied, "a second chance at happiness." As the sun began to set, painting the world in the same golden light as that day long ago, Olivia took Yorick's hand and spoke the words that had once seemed impossible. "I love you, Yorick Hawkins. Every day, I thank God that you were patient enough to sit with a silent widow until she found her voice again." "And I love you, Olivia Hawkins," he replied, kissing her with the same tenderness as their first kiss. "Every word from your lips is still music to my ears." Together they walked down the hill toward home, toward their children, toward the life they had built from grief and silence and patient love, a love that had finally given a voice to the woman no one else had wanted.